All right, so what yesterday we left off talking about bolt sizes in preparation for talking about torquing, right? Okay, because in order to know the torque on something, you have to know what kind of bolt you're using. And the rule number one is what? Wrench size is not the bolt size. All right. Okay, so if I said I have an AN 3-12, what size bolt do I have? 3/16 inch diameter by 1 inch and 2/8, which is also the same as 1.25, inch and a quarter. All right, very good. Does the inch and a quarter, this part right here, play into the torque at all? The answer would be no. No, it's strictly diameter. All right, so two things are, well, we'll get to that already. All right, so we got that. We'll go back to this. All right, so if you've got that then. Now, another thing about bolts then, you have to know pretty much two things. You have to know the diameter, and you have to know the threads per inch. And why? Because bolts come in sort of two flavors, if you will. There's NF for National Fine. And NC, or National Course. I spelled course right? I think so. All right, so how are we going to figure out the thread pitch? Glad you asked. All right, so we got that. We figure out how to do this. Okay, bolt material. I'm not really, you guys in this class are not going to get it much into bolt material, but this means that it's CAD plated. We could have a C for corrosion resistant. We could have an H for a drilled head. Safety, do anybody remember what the A stands for? It means absent the hole. See this hole right here? Change my pen. This hole right here? Okay, this is the way they're normally made, a bolt. So if I just ordered an AN 4-5 or whatever, I'm going to get a bolt with a hole in it. What's that hole for? Yeah, for a pin, for a cotter pin, for some sort of safetying mechanism. So if I add an A to it, it means absent the hole, and I get something like this. It does not have a hole. So if I have a hole, that means that I'm going to have a castellated nut. And if I have something like this, then I'll use a different type of self-locking nut. All right, where are we going with this here? Okay, so thread pitch gauge. So I think we talked about this just a little bit. Yeah.
Can you repeat the last part?
I don't remember what I said. What did I say?
Oh, like you said, if it is A.
A means absent the hole.
Okay.
There's no hole. There's no hole right here.
Okay.
See, this has a hole. This one doesn't.
You said something else, like you said, like if it doesn't have a.
So if you have a hole, you're going to use a castle nut. If you don't have a hole, you use a self-locking nut or a plain nut.
Okay.
I'll get to that in a little bit. All right.
Hey, Kevin?
Yeah.
For NF, National Fine Thread, isn't there also a unified standard thread?
Not in aviation. Yeah, there really is, but I get more into that when we do regular hardware. So there's really a lot more to it. But if you want to just break it down to the most simplistic point, it's just those two. There's fine and coarse, and okay. So there's UNF, right? Unified National Fine, and it's the exact same thing except for one bolt, and I forget offhand which size bolt it is, but it's one sort of far out there, huh?
Like a 12 or 14?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
If NF is National Fine, what's NCU?
National Course. Okay, so thread pitch gauge is going to help you figure out what size pitch it is. So in this case, we have what, 12 threads per inch. See a little 12 right there? All right, but so you get a bolt out, and then you have, let me see, a thread pitch gauge. picture? No, I don't. The thread pitch gauge, and if you haven't seen one, it's got a whole set of these things in there. All right, so you take one out and you try it. Nope. Take the next one out, try it. Nope. Right? Take the next one out, try it. Nope. All right, there's a much easier way to do this. All right, so this is the chart out of AC 4313. And it has all of the bolts. So notice right here, fine thread, coarse thread. Which one are aviation, mostly? Fine thread up here in the top. All right. So it's the bolt size. So remember, an 8 is actually a screw. So screws actually go 4, 6, 8, 10. 10 is the same thing as 3/16. So if you had your own book, you could write that on there. 3/16. Same thing. Okay, note the end. That is the threads per inch. So that is 32 threads per inch. That is 28 threads per inch. So let's take a look right here at this 1/4 inch. So if I had a bolt and I measured it and I found out that it was a 1/4 inch and I want to know what the thread pitch is, I could go through every single one of the little tools with the little teeth, or I could look at this and go, well, it's either going to be a 28 or a 20, right? Now you only have to try 2 of them. It can be no other thing, because it can be a little difficult when you start getting, really close, like 30 threads per inch is kind of close to 28, and I've seen people getting mixed up. But so first measure it, then look at the chart. It's either a 28 or a 20. If I have a 5/16, it's either what?
24 or 18.
It's 24 or 18. Those are only 2 choices. You follow that? I just made it a whole lot easier. All right. Yeah.
Sorry, can you please repeat it again? You said like, how did you go from the 1027 like dash 3 plus 16?
I didn't understand that.
It's the same thing.
How did I go from a 10 to a 3/16?
Yeah.
It's the same thing. A 1032 is the same as a 3/16.
Okay.
Because in screws go for side number 4, number 6, number 8, that's not hashtag, number 10. That's the size of screws. Got it?
Okay.
Bolts. Bolts are 3/16 is the smallest, then a 1/4 inch, then 5/16. This is the same as this. Got it? I don't think you do, but then just trust me. Write it down. A number 10 is the same thing as a 3/16. Got it?
Okay.
All right. There's also a number 12 screw. That's not very common. All right. So, but in aviation, these are your standards. 4, 6, 8, 10, then bolts. So these are the same. A number 10 screw is the same thing as a 3/16 inch bolt. So in other words, let's see here. If I needed a nut for my number 10 screw, guess what size it's going to be? It'll be 3/16. If I need a nut for my 3/16 screw, guess which nut it's going to be? Same dang one, right? Absolutely the same nut. So that's why it's the same size. All right, so back here. All right, so now you understand this column here. All right, now we're going to look at something else. We have tension type nuts and shear type nuts. All right. A tension is something that wants to get pulled apart this way. Shear would be 2 sheets of metal with a bolt going through it, and one piece of metal wants to go that way and the other piece of metal wants to go that way, and it's going to shear it off. So when you're doing stuff in shear, because we're working on aircraft, we got to have things as light as we can. What happens is you use a smaller nut. So shear uses a much smaller nut. There's not as many threads in it. And because there's not as many threads in it, if you try and tighten it, you'll strip it out. So shear type nuts, number 1, have less threads. Number 2, it's not trying to pull something apart. All the nut is really doing is holding the bolt in place. Right? It's because the shear loading is really what we're worried about. So shear type nuts have a much lower torque value. So let's look at the torque value here for the 1/4 inch. So 1/4 inch for a tension is 50 to 70, with the maximum being 100. For a shear type, we'll do that blue. Shear type, it's 30 to 40 with a maximum of 60. So if I take a look at this then over here, I'll go back to my red. 1/4 inch, really it's like, so it's 50 to 70 with a maximum of 100. What are you going to choose? Why such a big range? Well, there's a big range because you're going to run into a little bit of a problem. If you have a castellated nut, you have got to get that hole lined up in there for the cotter pin. So what you do is you're going to go, 50 was the minimum, right? So torque it to 50 and stop. And if the pin lines up, you're done. The pin doesn't line up, what's my maximum? 100 inch-pounds. Inch-pounds. If the hole doesn't line up, then I can go up to 100 to get it lined up. Assuming that it's tension. If it's shear, that's something different. And while I've got this open, this up here, this is the proper way to put the preferred method for putting a cotter pin in. It looks like this over here. This is the optional. It actually says that, preferred optional. Good choice of words there. All right, let's go back here. So what do we got here? So most of the time you're going to be dealing with fine thread. Do you now understand how to do this? So first you're going to pick the diameter. Then after the diameter, you're going to look at what threads per inch. Once you've got that, you've got your torques. So remember, it's tension here and tension here. It's a little hard to do because this says tension, but that doesn't. But this is tension type nuts, MS2365, and this also says MS2365. So this column goes with this column, this one goes with this one. Why they did it that way, I don't know. All right, so how should the threads be? Should I oil them?
Unless it calls for it.
Well, does it matter?
Yeah.
Why does it matter?
Because you're not going to get a true torque if it's wet. 'Cause it's going to.
Because you sounded like a guy who knew what you were talking about, too. You were exactly right. So note this, caution, the following torque values are derived from oil-free cadmium-plated threads. What is cadmium? That's that stuff they make Easter eggs out of. That's the cadmium eggs. Yes, that's exactly what, that's the stuff on the inside, I think. Not really sure. All right, that's the cad plating that makes it gold. So oil-free. What happens if you put oil on it? You change the torque by up to 40%. So you add 40% to these numbers and you're going to cause some problems. Let's turn it around. What if you're building an engine? All engines call for wet torque and you don't put the proper lubrication on it.
You're going to have 40% less torque.
Yes, you would have, well, the percents don't work out quite that way, but that is as close to accurate as I can get. You actually lose 40% of your torque. So I see that often working in aviation. Cylinders are bolted on to engines very different than a car is. And what happens is you'll get people will sometimes talk to you or talk to me and they'll say, hey, what does it mean when I start losing a stud or two out of the engine? Yeah, it means that your engine wasn't properly torqued. And, well, that takes about 10 minutes to explain what happens. But engine's failing, basically. Yeah.
Is there a part for wet as well?
Okay, fair question. Where is this chart out of? 4313. Is this specific to any aircraft?
No.
What does it, though, entail? Is this something I can use for engines or?
It's like a general airframe.
General airframe bolts only. All right, so if I'm working on an engine, I'm going to have a chart very similar to this in an engine book. And so what if the chart isn't in the engine book? It is. It just is. Trust me on that. It has to be, and it is. I've never run into a situation where it wasn't.
They don't make Haynes manuals for airplanes?
No. So you get a whole separate engine manual. It's very different than airframe. Airframe and engines, when it comes to torquing, is bolts is different in the sense that airframe is almost always dry. Engines are almost always wet with a 100 weight oil. Propellers are so exact on how they want their torque most propeller shops will actually send a little tiny cup of the exact lubricant that you're supposed to lubricate everything with. And when you lubricate it, you lubricate the threads and the bearing surface.
For propellers, do they use like the bolt spreading? Like they don't actually use like the torque, it's like the actual spreading of the bolt?
No, it's torque. All right, so what he's talking about is, good segue, thank you. When you are torquing a bolt, what you're doing is you're twisting a nut, right? And you should. If you have a bolt and a nut, you twist the nut, not the bolt part. So you twist the nut. And what you're doing is you're twisting it. And so when you're pulling on it, you're measuring how much twist you're putting on it. Stop and think about that. Who cares how much twist you're putting on it, right? That's meaningless in a sense. When an engineer designed the bolt and how it was supposed to go together, the last thing the engineer really cared was how much you're twisting it this way. That's actually a bad thing to be twisting it. What the thought is how much you are stretching the bolt. That's really what you're doing. And when you do this, especially on critical applications, the point is that you put the bolt under more tension than the component puts on it. So for example, engine cylinders, the cylinder actually bolts to the case. And so there's a metal-to-metal contact there. And if you're familiar with cars, you might want to think, your head and the bolts there. It's different, but same concept. So you torque it to a twist, right? But it's just ridiculous. Nobody cares about that twist. It is the pull. So what the engineer figures out is every time the cylinder fires, that cylinder, is actually trying to leave the crankcase. It's trying to go that way. It's trying to go away. And it pulls on the bolts every time it does that. Well, if you actually have the bolt stretching and relaxing every time the cylinder fires, it won't last very long and it snaps. And so what you have to have happen is you have to have that bolt pulled tighter than the cylinder ever puts pressure on it. And the only way, well, there's two ways to do that then, to figure out how much pull is on there. One way to do it, and a lot of, Lycoming does this with their really high-end, high horsepower engines on the connecting rods, is they're machined on both ends and you use a micrometer. You torque it to a certain point, but then from there on out, you actually turn it and measure it, and you're seeing how far you're stretching that bolt and use a micrometer to actually do it. That's really what you're after. So in a perfect world, we wouldn't have torque wrenches. Every single bolt out there would have machine surface, and we use a micrometer to see how tight it was in a perfect world. But of course, it's not necessary. So what an engineer has figured is that if you are twisting a nut to a certain point, that is the equivalent of this much stretch. So you're just putting stretch on it. That's all you're really trying to do. If you add oil to it, then it's going to turn easier. And if it turns easier, that means that when you have the same amount of torque on your wrench, you've pulled it a whole lot more. That's why you get the addition and subtraction of torque.
You ever do turn of the nut?
Did I ever what?
Do turn of the nut?
Turn of, well, I have, definitely. Turn of the bolt, turn of the nut. So it's the same concept. An engineer has figured out that if you tighten a bolt up to a certain point, and then you turn it X number of degrees, that's the same thing as a stretch. And it takes out the error of improper torquing, too much oil, not enough oil, things like that. I was trying to think, it seems like there was something in aviation that was that way, but I can't, this is not coming to me right now.
I was wondering if that, or is that, it just doesn't use it, or it does once in a while?
Yeah, it does once in a while. Fuel injector lines are that way. Spark plug leads are that way. So it's something we do all the time. I just didn't think about it. It's finger tight plus half a flat. So yes, sometimes you do it that way. All right, so back to this. All right, so what kind of thread? What's the condition of the thread? Oil-free cadmium-plated threads. Okay. All right, so I explained to you about that. Some of these slides I'm using for a different class. All right, so different kind of nuts we have. We're going to talk about safety wire in a little bit. These are self-locking nuts. Self-locking nuts have this green part right here. It's a nylon insert, and it doesn't have threads. And so what happens is, as you screw it down, you can screw it on with your fingers until the bolt gets this nylon part, and then it doesn't go anymore. And then you need a wrench to actually turn it on, and the nylon isn't threaded, so it grips on to the bolt. And we can use those in aviation in a lot of places. There are some places we can't, such as places where it's too hot and this melts out. You cannot use it in an area where if a nut fell off, it would get ingested into the engine. We have plain nuts. Notice we have what's the difference between this one here and this one here?
The one on the left is supposed to be drilled.
Supposed to be drilled?
Yeah, for safety wire?
No. No?
One that has a separate washer built into the bottom of it.
Okay. Notice how there it looks like it has a little washer built in? It kind of does. That doesn't count as a washer, but guess what? That's the part that goes towards the washer. I'm hearing it now.
Shear over there.
Which one is this one?
That one's the other one.
This one's tension and this one's shear. There's the difference right there. Shear nuts are always smaller than the tension nuts. So how do you know if you have a shear or tension? Well, you experience where you have to compare the two. All right, we talked about this. I shouted it out. When you are bolting something together, most stuff in aviation, this would be aluminum, this red part, and we have to protect it. So you put a washer under the head, and that protects the head from digging into the expensive aluminum part. And then you put another washer down below it, and then if you're using a split lock or a lock washer, then the lock washer goes last. So never have the lock washer, this is a spring type, and these are internal, external teeth type. Those little teeth grip into the metal. Now, if I had a really expensive aircraft part, do you think I want this digging into that part? I'm going to say no, I don't want that. It digs into the washer. I know, now you're looking at it going, okay, so that digs into the washer. What keeps the washer in this from moving? I don't know. Somebody figured out that works, and it seems to work just fine. So look at all of your bolted items. In aviation, they pretty much always have some sort of safety mechanism. So what are the safety mechanisms? Well, one, cotter pin, safety wire, or I'm going to say self-locking nut because these come in low temp and high temp. If I'm going to use a plain nut, what do I need to use? Lock washer. Toby, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
You say you can't use the self-locking nuts for like high temperature, but you say they come in high temperature ones. What is like the extent of that?
450 degrees. After that, the cadmium starts baking into it. So, on the self-locking 250 is the max temp, and then let's see, I got high temp 450. I was right, yay, 450. I'll go through those in a minute. Okay, so safety. So we've got. I know I'm not writing a lot of notes today. Sorry. Cotter pin, safety wire, self-locking nut, or if I'm going to use a plain nut, I have to use a lock washer. And does the lock washer go against my expensive part?
No.
It does not. You got to have a flat washer first. That's the way. So when you guys are doing your torque project, this is proving to be one of the better 309 classes that I've ever had, which just goes to show that I'm just becoming that much of a great teacher. Or turn around, I sucked that bad before. When you rule number one, there's a lot of rule number ones. All of rules are number one. So. What happens if you get something and you do it and I say, well, this is wrong, and you say to me, well, that's the way I got it out of the tool room? Is that going to be acceptable?
No.
It should not be, no, because then which one of the dirty dozens is that?
Norms.
Probably norms, something like that. Norms, lack of knowledge. Okay. So remember, the part you get out of the tool room may be from somebody who failed 309 last time. So be careful, what you do. So now this is my A class, right? So my whole point is when you get the torque plate out and you're looking at it and you don't have enough washers, say something. Say it to me, ask James, hey, could I get another washer for here? Right now he knows that you guys aren't aware of part numbers and stuff. So there's a decent chance that he might show you how to find a part number, he might get it for you. Once you're out of 309, you say, I need a washer. You say, what's part number? Right? And so you have to figure out a part number and everything. So just be prepared for that. But you're going to learn that, so that's great. So, all right, so if you don't have a washer under the head, and if you don't have a washer down here in the lock washer, you need to go to the tool room or ask one of the assistants or ask me, hey, can I get it the proper number of washers here? You can have more than one washer on this side. Sometimes you might need an extra one or two because the bolt's just a little bit too long.
So why do we need a washer?
Why do you need a washer here?
Yeah, and on the top and bottom.
Well, you need one here because you don't want that bolt turning and digging into this very expensive part. I'm imagining this being a spar of an aircraft. You know what a spar is? The spar is the thing in the wings that go from the fuselage, the cabin, all the way out to the end. Mm-hmm. They're under extreme stress. Do you want to see giant scratches and gouges out of those things? No, and they're irreplaceable. So you want to put a washer underneath that head so it doesn't dig in. Mm-hmm. Same thing on the other side, down here. You want a washer so when you spin this, it doesn't dig in. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did you ever cut a bolt instead of adding more washers?
Never. I would never cut a bolt. I would just get the next size down. But sometimes the next one down is too small and the next one up is a little bit too big. It's hard to make a too small one small. So you can use a couple more washers on there.
Yeah, because basically you don't want the grip, well, obviously you don't want the grip showing because then it's not going to tighten up.
Right. Yes. So what he's saying is if the grip is all the way down here, you're just going to tighten the nut up into the end of the bolt and it's still going to be loose. That's a bad thing. All right. So we're going to make sure we have some sort of lock washer. All right, getting back to these. So these are our self-locking nylon nuts. You can use them up to how many degrees? 250. What happens after 250? Yeah, this little nylon starts melting and dripping right out. Seen it many a times. This is the low profile, which means that it's what? Shear loads only. What happens if you try and torque a shear nut to the same torque as a tension nut?
You have a fall-off nut.
You have a fall-off nut. It gets all turny. What is technically the tightest torque you can tighten any nut to? Tighten it till it gets loose and back it off a quarter turn. That's a joke. You either get that or you don't. Toby, another question? Huh? Okay. You're just stretching? I'm basically saying you turn it till it actually stripped out and you go, oops, and go back a little bit. That didn't happen. All right. These are, I'm saying with finger quotes, the high temp self-locking nuts because they only go up to 450. So if you actually use this on an aircraft exhaust system, what happens is the cadmium plating on the outside, that gold color, bakes into it and it becomes extremely brittle. You put your socket on it and go to turn it off and it actually just crumbles into pieces. So high temp meaning up to 450. Then there's actual real high temp. All right, castellated nuts, we talked about those. And the torque, lowest torque, and then tighten it up to the highest. What happens if the lowest torque doesn't work and you go all the way to the highest torque and it still doesn't work? Get a new nut, add a washer, get a different washer, usually get a new nut. All right, that's our shear. Notice there are not many threads in this thing. What do you got? About 1 or 2 threads right there. These don't count for much of anything. So, the last 309 class, I think they went through a lot of those. All right, so torquing. In the program, you're going to be using a torque wrench that looks like this. Now, first thing is the torque wrench that you guys are getting is like, this one is 0 to, 75 inch-pounds. And I guess it's worth saying that there is inch-pound and foot-pound torque wrenches. And if we go back to this chart, what is everything in? Inch pounds. So, all right. And while we're on this subject here, and I've got this chart open, we shall discuss what happens if you forget that the wrench size is not the bolt size. All right, so I'm thinking of a particular nut inside of an engine right now. This doesn't work for engines, but it's a great example because it's close. And let's say that's a 3/8 inch nut. 3/8 inch nut. What size wrench does a 3/8 nut use? 9/16. You are correct. 7/16, half 9/16. Actually, I think it's a 5/16, 24. We'll go with it. All right, so that actually uses a 9/16 inch wrench. But this particular bolt is really a 3/8 24. And what is the proper torque I should be using if it is in tension? We'll go all the way to maximum. What's the maximum?
390.
All right, 390. But because I'm using a 9/16 inch wrench, I think, oh, something wrench size, bolt size. I forget what that is, but Kevin always says something about the wrench size. Must be that the 9/16 is the wrench size, or bolt size. So instead of realizing that it's a 9/16 wrench on a 3/8 inch bolt, you think 9/16 wrench. Maybe that's the bolt size. I don't know. So you go, yeah, whatever. It's the bolt size. So what is the torque I'm going to put on it?
800.
Over the limit
1,000.
to start with.
So instead of a maximum of 390, you decide that the maximum must be 1,600. Or yeah, even if you're being generous and you go to the lowest possible torque and you still only go to 800, guess what? You should have stopped somewhere around 4. So you're going to double the torque on it, even at the minimum. That sounds pretty bad, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Now, if it's this particular installation I was thinking of, where and students have done this when we build our Lycoming engines, there's this one bolt in the back, and I guess it's a 5/16 24 bolt. But in the service instruction, it also talks about this bolt either comes in this size or it comes in this size. And because everybody's using a 1/2 inch wrench, they key it on the 1/2 inch and then they jump to the 1/2 inch torque. So this is a crankshaft. This is a crankshaft that costs $6,000. And so it should have a torque of 225, but instead they're putting a torque of 1,100. What do you think that does to the threads inside of the crankshaft?
That's really not.
Well, if they don't catch it and they put it together and it somehow manages to hold together, that bolt's going to fail shortly, and that's the one bolt holding one gear on that drives the whole drivetrain. So that gear is going to fall off and the whole engine is going to stop. Or it's going to damage the crankshaft. It'll strip out the inside of the crankshaft. So if you strip out, hopefully the bolt will break first, and it won't, but you're still stressing out a crankshaft. And so if you had to go to the boss and say, boss, I accidentally forgot how to read it, how torquing works, and I over torqued this crankshaft. Can we just get a new crankshaft real quick? That's how much again? 6-7 grand, plus labor, plus time, plus. So pay attention. And this particular, I'll warn you, I'm always watching for this. But it's a good case in point. This is one particular service instruction that talks about both a 5/16 bolt and a 1/2 inch bolt. And you have to stop and which one do I have? And it's a case where people read it and they're making what they're reading fit what they want it to. Because I ask students when they get to that, they bring me a bolt that looks like an hourglass. I mean, it's just in the middle. It's just, if they don't break it off inside, I'm like, how did this happen? And they explain it. Well, it says right here 1/2 inch, and I got the 1/2 inch. Oh, at about that point they realize, but it's making something fit when it doesn't. You have to read the directions and follow it, not try and say, well, this is Must be what they're trying to talk about. All right, so I tell you all that to tell you. Okay, so there's inch pounds and foot pounds. As you can see, aviation mostly gives you stuff in inch pounds. So 1 foot pound is equal to 12 inch pounds. So if I had 120 inch pounds, I should try writing not in a diagonal. 120 inch pounds is equal to how many foot pounds? 10 foot pounds. It's just like converting inches to feet. Divide by 12. Or multiply by 12. So be very cautious of your inch and foot pounds. Make sure that you aren't crossing over. You could be given something, a chart that says inch pounds and a wrench that reads in foot pounds. So if it's given to you in inch and foot, you got to do the proper math. The torque wrench you guys are getting, this one is appropriate for, here's 5 inch pounds, here's 10, 15. So it's appropriate. You guys are getting one that's like 0 to 300. It's way too big for what we're doing, but you just get what you get right there. All right, so be aware of that. When you're using these, notice that this is called knurling over here. This is the effective range of the torque wrench right here. So you should be grabbing it around, centered over this area right here. Nice, gentle, steady pulls. Try not to start and stop. It changes the torque value. So also work with the guys, the helpers over on the torque wrench thing, and experiment. Please experiment. That's what it's there for. See what it looks like. Feel it. Notice how off the torque wrenches can be. Torque wrenches should be calibrated at least every year. When I built engines, I calibrated my torque wrench at every setting change. So whenever I had to change, I was going to go 300 inch pounds. That machine that's in the lab, that's the one I had. It's literally that one. I took it. They're not using it. And I had it on a bench, and I was building engines right here, and 6 feet away was that. So I would read the manual. It would say, okay, you're going to torque this to 300 inch pounds. I would change it to 300 inch pounds. I would go over here and I would exercise myself, my elbow, my tool, until I was consistent at 300 inch pounds, and I'd walk over the engine and torque everything 300 inch pounds. Then I'd change it to 600, and I'd walk over and change it, and I would do it until it's at 600 and exercise it and make everything work. So I calibrated mine 20 times a day. But it should be calibrated. There should be a sticker on it that says calibrated every year, and you recalibrate it whenever they're dropped, abused, or every year.
How would you? So yeah, you use the machine. How do you fix it?
Okay, so I'd use that same machine we have. I'd have a chart, a piece of paper, and so it would have all the settings. So like this one, I would do it at 5 inch pounds, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. I would do it in all these increments. And so you would bring the torque wrench to that setting and see what the big dial read. And then you would write it on this card, and it would go back to the torque wrench. So like 5 inch pounds would be 5.5. And so it'd show the user how far off it is. Because it's rare that torque wrenches are absolutely perfect through the whole range. There's usually a margin of error in them. Oh, they're a margin of error. This is the click type. Click types are nice, but they have some real positives and some real negatives. The positive is you don't have to have your head over the dial and looking at it and fighting it. If you can actually reach something and you don't have to see it, you can feel it. It clicks. If you've never used a click type torque wrench, make sure you get some instruction on it. I had somebody last year who about blew a bolt in half. Like, oh, what are you doing? You can just tell. You know what the torque is this, and they're, and I'm like, whoa, what are you doing? Like, well, I'm waiting for it to click. The thing, it's got a little spring in there, and it does one click. And I'm like, it clicked once. It's like, well, I thought it would just keep clicking. All right, no. So we had a lesson in how they work and experiment. It's like, oh, now I get it. All right, so click type, dial type. This is the old beam type. These things are actually kind of cool. I think I have one.
I've used one.
They're actually,
That is so.
Yeah.
here's the great thing about beam type torque wrenches. You're supposed to be at so many things in my mind. Okay, the errors that people make with torque wrenches are jerking them and actually putting a twist on them or holding them funny. You can really do that with some of the extensions we use. With these right here, the handle is on a pin. And so your job is to hold it so that this handle never touches this bar. And if you can do that, it's extremely accurate. And so what happens, the more I twist it, the more this rod is going to twist out. I think I've got yeah, like that. So the more it's going to do that. And with that little pin, it keeps you honest. You can't put a twist on it. So they're actually kind of cool in that respect. And then there's digital now. Yeah, I actually have this one down here. I brought it in and calibrated it. I was shocked at how accurate it is. It is very accurate. And then, all right, we covered this.
Yes.
All right.
Digital in there, is it because majority of the mechanic?
Okay, so as you're saying, we don't have digital in there. Remember, we're the second oldest A&P school in America. So digital has not been around for that long. You go back, when I was building engines, a digital torque wrench would have set you back $3,000 to $5,000. Right, so we didn't have that kind of
They
thing.
weren't even accurate.
You know, now you can get this one down here. My father-in-law gave me this one. He's like, I just got this in my toy. I don't need this. It's $20 at Sears. Here, you take it. And I like it.
How accurate is that Surge one?
What's that?
The Surge one accurate?
The Surge one? What?
Sears.
The Sears? Highly accurate. Shockingly accurate.
Yeah.
All right, so I have two click type, and when I bought them from Snap-on, they were Snap-on torque wrenches come in a red box. These came in gold boxes because they were so accurate and so expensive. And I'm building engines, and it made sense to me. Crap. I had to send them back to the factory 3 times because they were so inaccurate. So, and then I get, this Sears one here, out of a box, and it is so accurate that it was just nailing it. Yeah.
Out of all the torque wrenches that you use then, so that's the most one that you enjoy using?
Not really, because this has a 1/2-inch drive on it, and this is really for much heavier torque. So it really won't do your everyday stuff on aviation. But this works great for 300 to 300 inch pounds and 600 inch pounds, stuff like that.
Can you change that?
Yeah, you said, but this is a 1/2-inch drive. I mean, it takes big
But I mean,
sockets.
like, can you purchase like other ones?
Yeah, like this one
that?
here.
Oh.
Yeah, sure. There's so many different types now. And I recommend, hey, if you want to, get your own torque wrench. Last semester when we built engines, I told everybody, buy a torque wrench or bring it in if you want. Let's not fight, because we have limited supply. There's all kinds of torque wrenches. People are buying them at garage sales, eBay, Craigslist, and first thing we do is test them, and most of them tested out pretty good, shockingly good.
Buy the electric ones.
My clicker.
If you can afford it. The one bad thing about the click type is that there are certain applications where it says that you should apply a torque and hold it. You can't do that with the click type.
Because once it clicks, it's done.
Technically speaking, yeah, it changes the torque then. You can't keep a consistent hold on it. But with this type, and this type, you can hold it and keep the torque, because the digital is going to display it the entire time that whatever torque you're putting on it. And beep. But you can actually watch it. You can say, if I want 600 inch pounds, I can watch it, 590, 595, 66, 601, 600, 602, and keep it right there for as long as I want to.
So which one of those two would be good for engines and stuff?
It just depends. Like I say, this one works great for 300 to 600. So there are a lot of bolts on engines that are in the low 120 inch pound range. Then there are the cylinder-based nuts that are 300 to 600 inch pounds. This one's nice because it's 1/2-inch drive for that. So it's you need several of them. It's hard to say, I want one good torque wrench and it's got to work for everything. It doesn't work that way. You want a small one, you want a big one.
How much is those Craftsman last time you've seen?
They don't even sell them anymore. They're really cheap. James was looking them up. He was going to get a couple of them for us, but they're discontinued. All right. Did I mention that the wrench
He
size
was
is...
so rude as
Did I mention that? Because if I didn't, I am now.
There's always a 3/16 difference, is that still holding true?
That seems to be.
I haven't found one where it doesn't.
Okay, there you go. I don't really care though. Just remember this part. Okay, so I'm not going to cover this here, but in lab you have an exercise where you have to put a little adapter on a torque wrench, and when you put an adapter going this way, it adds torque.
Yes.
So if it says 100, you're going to get more than 100 inch-pounds on this, right?
Yep.
So you have to do the math, and you've got to figure out what happens. And this is the formula, and this formula is located in 4313. And if you put it going the other way, and I put on 100 inch-pounds on the dial, I'm going to get less than. All right. So notice that, we'll go back one. The formula is T times L, and this is all in your book, right? So T times L, L plus E. L plus E is the bottom, equals Y, all right? Now I'm going to go one over. Same thing, but now it's L minus E, L minus E. So what happens if I put the adapter completely sideways? You can use this formula, or you can use this formula. Either one will work. But what is the E distance? 0. So what is T times L, L plus 0? Guess what Y is going to equal? It's going to equal, it's going to equal T. So it doesn't change. Maybe some of you are like, I have no idea what the heck he just said. So I'll give it to you in simple English. When you put the adapter sideways, you don't have to change the applied torque is the equal torque. So if you're using an adapter like this and you want to cheat, put the adapter 90 degrees. And then you don't have to do any math. But if it doesn't fit and you have to go this way, you have to do math. If you go backwards, you got to do math. But if you can fit it sideways, you don't have to do math. And honestly, I will tell you from experience and having the torque machine, if you put a long enough adapter on it, it definitely changes it by quite a bit.
Yeah.
So it doesn't quite hold true sideways. So if you want to be really accurate, don't put it sideways. Put it this way or backwards and do the math. All right, let me see if there's anything else I want to talk about. Torque.
You guys ever use geared adapters?
I didn't have to. Helicopter people do because they got big nuts. Shut up. Adapters. All right, I think it is break time.